With players such as Halliburton and Şengün thriving now that were drafted lower in the lottery, but were very skilled clearly going into the draft, I wonder if teams will look to adjust their draft strategies a bit and look less at raw athleticism and more at ball skills. Take the Warriors, for instance. If they had taken LaMelo and I'm assuming Franz Wagner instead of the more athletic and raw Wiseman and Kuminga, they would possibly be in a better place right now. What do you guys think about that? Do we care more? I mean, we talk a lot about tall ball now, but it's really skill ball.
I mean, the flip side of that is, Anthony Edwards was a guy who had some skill, but still needed to develop. And it was mostly based on not mostly, but I mean, his potential is the skill plus his overwhelming physical abilities. So, you can pick and choose your endpoints kind of, but, at the very top, you still need that athletic pop, I think.
It's so hard. This question is so hard in the sense of like, in hindsight, yes, the Warriors screwed up massively with the picks that they made, right? Like, just think about how amazing that team would be with Franz Wagner, right? Like, we're just sitting there going like, this would be a whole different level. But it's just one of those things. First off, the draft is kind of a crapshoot. And we've seen some dudes that are skilled guys that go later that don't pop, right? Like, it's easy to point out the Halliburtons. It's easy to point out, Şengün and things like that. But like, there's also guys that don't pop. And we also understand that, like, how many times we see these dudes in the playoffs. And I'm not talking about those two guys, but like, they're not athletic enough to be on the floor. They're slow. They're plotting and things like there's just an element of that. I think it all comes down to your team. What's your current construction? What do you need? What are you looking for? I think sometimes teams are leaning too heavily on potential versus realization, but also if you're drafting in the lottery, even in the late lottery, you may not be looking for a guy that can be you need a refined piece. You might be saying, hey, we need a guy that's just going to pop and be a guy we can develop over the next couple of years. Like Edwards is a great example, Seth. Like that's a dude, perfect example of the other way. And I think it really is just dependent on teams, the situation they're in, what their long-term plans are and stuff. It's just hard. And I think coming into the draft with these hard rules sometimes, I think is dumb for teams. And I think that makes it difficult.
And I would say Halliburton and like Desmond Bane, those guys are a little bit different because they were already good and they improved a lot. Like they improved like you would expect a guy on a star trajectory to improve. And Şengün is, I mean, this could be that season where he's making a leap. That's still pretty rare. You're not getting a lot of guys that fall out of the lottery that wind up in this position. I mean, overall, I think NBA teams do a pretty good job with this. The Warriors just have like this one glaring, like absolutely
the Wiseman, the Wiseman over Melo is a very particular, and that's not even maybe you didn't like maybe you decided you didn't like LaMelo Ball, which is fair enough. We've talked about this a bunch, but a guy as inexperienced as Wiseman, putting him in like sort of the highest decisions per minute situation in the league. It was never, you're always asking for a hard time there.
We should also note too, it was the 2020 draft. Like if we're going to hold that on them, we got to acknowledge that draft, information wise, teams were at a massive disadvantage in terms of what they were getting, and I think that was a challenging thing just in that one situation for the Warriors and a couple other teams. But I think ultimately, like I said, it's just so team dependent. I just think having hard rules is a difficult thing going into the draft. We never draft this, or we only draft these guys. Like
I'm only drafting 4-year players.
Yeah. And those two examples, like if you want to, like Halliburton was a guy that a lot of people liked, but I don't think even his strongest backer would have predicted he could become this sort of, like, you thought he might be like a really high level connector, and his development as a sort of primary, like heliocentric offensive, offensively dominant. Like he's sort of become what people were maybe in a different style perhaps, but like what people were hoping Cade Cunningham would be. And that's what Halliburton has become. And that's, just from a standpoint of getting his own shot, he's progressed already well beyond what, was really projectable coming in. And then Şengün, I think that he's taken an athletic improvement that I think is unusual. I think there was an article that just came out in was it The Ringer talking about his work at P3. And I think that's not necessarily something you can always count on. But I think he was a guy who, again, was super productive, killed draft models, and people liked him. But I think that especially at the position he plays, like that big step change in his athleticism has unlocked so much of his game.
And with Şengün, I think like I've already seen it this season, as he hesitates less, especially on that pick and pop 3, I think more things are even going to open up. Like he may take a couple of mini leaps this season. And I mean, we'll see how Amen Thompson works out when he gets healthy, but he's probably going to be their best playmaker this season as far as decision maker. So Şengün. So I think that there's even more juice to be squeezed out of him this season, where he's just coming around.
And I think for him, the athleticism is as much about making him a two-way player, which is, I think, important as at it, that big spot. In a way, it might be less so for Halliburton.
Yeah. Also, Şengün, there are mixtapes out there with Şengün catching bodies like over and over and over again. So for a guy who hadn't played a whole lot, who we consider, to lack athleticism, I mean, he's got a pretty good highlight reel.